Imagine it's a Friday night. Your phone buzzes. A friend is texting you about a party. Good people, good music, supposedly a great time. And you stare at that message for a solid 30 seconds. Then you put the phone face down, pull a blanket over yourself, and feel genuinely relieved. Not guilty. Not lonely. Just relieved. If that sounds familiar, you've probably spent a chunk of your life wondering if something is wrong with you. Because we live in a world that treats socializing like a vitamin. Like if you're not getting enough of it, you're deficient somehow. The extrovert is celebrated. The life of the party gets the promotions, the friendships, the Instagram following. And the person who'd rather spend Sunday reading in quiet. They get told to come out of their shell. But here's what psychology has been quietly discovering for decades, and what most people never hear about. Preferring solitude isn't a flaw. It isn't shyness, it isn't anxiety, and it definitely isn't a sign that you're broken. In many cases, it's actually a sign of a richly functioning mind. Let me show you why. First, let's talk about what's actually happening in the brain of someone who genuinely prefers being alone. This isn't about people who are afraid of social situations. That's social anxiety, and that's a different conversation. We're talking about people who can socialize just fine, who can work a room and make people laugh and hold a conversation, but who, when given a free afternoon, will choose solitude almost every single time. Psychologists actually have a word for this. It's called introversion. And despite what pop culture has done with that word, its scientific definition is surprisingly specific. The psychologist Hans Eysenck, back in the 1960s, proposed that introverts and extroverts differ in their baseline levels of cortical arousal, essentially how stimulated their brains are at rest. Extroverts, he argued, have lower baseline arousal, so they seek stimulation from the outside world. Parties, crowds, conversation, these bring their brain to a comfortable operating level. Introverts, on the other hand, are already running closer to full capacity. The same party that energizes an extrovert can feel genuinely overwhelming to someone whose brain is already buzzing. Think of it like this. Imagine two people side by side, and each of them is holding a cup of coffee. One cup is almost empty. They're desperately reaching for more. The other cup is already full, and someone keeps trying to pour more coffee into it. That's not a personality weakness. That's just physics. More recent neuroscience has added layers to this. Studies using brain imaging have found that introverts show more activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with internal processing, self-reflection, and planning. Extroverts tend to show more activity in the dopaminergic reward pathways when interacting socially. In other words, the extrovert's brain rewards them with a hit of feel-good dopamine when they're around people. For introverts, that same dopamine response is more sensitive, which means the reward can tip into overwhelm faster. It's not that introverts dislike people. It's that their nervous system is tuned to a different frequency. And this brings us to something really fascinating that researchers call solitude as restoration. There was a study published in the Journal of Personality that found people high in the need for solitude weren't just neutral about being alone. They actively recovered from social interaction through time alone, the way you'd recover from a hard workout. Alone time for these individuals wasn't an absence of something. It was a presence of something. Rest, recharge, renewal. That's a profound reframe, because most people treat solitude like a waiting room, something you endure until the real life begins again. But for people psychologically wired this way, solitude is real life. It's where they do their deepest thinking, their most creative work, their most honest self-reflection. The philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote that all of humanity's problems stem from our inability to sit quietly in a room alone. That's a provocative line, but it points at something real. The capacity for solitude is not emptiness. It's a form of mastery. And look at history for a second. Darwin retreated to his thinking path in the English countryside to work through his ideas. Einstein said his best thinking happened in isolation. Carl Jung built a literal stone tower, no electricity, no guests, where he would go to think. Nikola Tesla spent enormous stretches of time alone, sometimes going days without human contact, while working through problems in his mind. These aren't cautionary tales. These are portraits of minds that needed stillness the way lungs need air. Now, I want to be careful here, because there's a danger in romanticizing solitude too much. There's an important distinction between chosen solitude and forced loneliness, and conflating the two can actually cause harm. Loneliness, the experience of being disconnected against your will, is genuinely damaging. Research by psychologist John Cacioppo showed that chronic loneliness increases the risk of mortality by around 26%, and it elevates stress hormones, disrupts sleep, and suppresses immune function. That's serious. But the key word is against your will. When solitude is chosen, when it is intentional, the psychological outcomes flip almost completely. Studies show that people who deliberately spend time alone report higher levels of creativity, stronger sense of self, better emotional regulation, and deeper satisfaction in the relationships they do maintain. It turns out that when you stop spreading yourself across every social obligation,